Active Directory: Alternative Authentication Schemes by Joe Squillace. Presentation Overview. During this presentation, we'll discuss the following topics. What is Active Directory and what is Active Directory authentication? How does authentication work? Active Directory authentication versus authorization. Active Directory authentication means and methods. Things to consider when choosing an alternative Active Directory authentication system. The different alternative Active Directory authentication methods available today. We'll look at the pros and cons of alternative Active Directory authentication systems. We'll discuss the most widely used alternate Active Directory authentication system. And we'll look at some recommendations for alternative Active Directory authentication systems. And finally, we'll discuss several companies that offer alternative Active Directory authentication system solutions. So, what is Active Directory and what is authentication? Active Directory is a directory service that is included with most Microsoft Windows Server operating systems, and it serves as a central location for network security, network administration, and management control of resources for administrators and management personnel. Through the security function, Active Directory is responsible for authenticating and authorizing all users and computers that will be accessing protected resources within or on the network. Authentication is the process of verifying that the user actually is who they say or claim to be, and Active Directory is responsible for this task. Active Directory uses Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP, versions 2 and 3, and Kerberos, using Primary Key Infrastructure, or PKI, as its primary authentication methods. So how does authentication work? When a user or system attempts to gain access to a network, they are required to input some form of credentials that contain some combination of a username and a password. Once the user has input their credentials, the system then compares the credentials that were input to a master list containing acceptable username and password combinations. If there is an initial match with the username and password, then the user or system is granted initial access to the network. However, the user is momentarily limited in what resources they can access until an authorization check has been performed. This authorization check will validate which network resources that specific user, based on matching the username and password entered, can access based on granted or assigned permissions given to them by the administration. Active Directory authentication versus authorization. Active Directory authentication is the process of determining whether or not someone or something is who or what they are claiming to be. Authentication usually involves some combination of a username and a password that needs to be verified before being granted access to a computer, network, etc. Active Directory authorization, on the other hand, is the process of determining which permissions a user or system has been granted and what resources they are permitted to access based on those permissions. Once a user or system has been authenticated and granted initial access to the system, they will then be evaluated on an authorization level to determine exactly which resources they are entitled to reference, use, and be permitted access to, and to what level of access they should receive. Active Directory authentication means and methods. Means of authentication is grouped into three categories: something a user knows, usually a username and password; something a user has, typically a key card, smart card, USB token; and something a user is, some type of physical characteristic or some kind of biometric system. Then you have multi-factor authentication. This is the act of authenticating a user based on a combination of more than one of the above authentication methods. Kerberos is a ticket-based system that uses shared secret keys or tokens. CHAP is Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, which is a three-way handshake authentication system that is used with dial-up connections. Now, they do offer several alternative authentication methods that can be used instead or in conjunction with Active Directory and all or some of the above mentioned resources. Several things need to be considered before you choose an alternative Active Directory authentication system. For example, what operating systems will be used with the alternative solution? Will you be using Windows, Linux, Mac, etc.? What is the cost of implementing the alternative solution into your current network or system? What's the initial cost of the devices, the license fees, training costs, software, etc.? What is the cost of replacing different components of the alternative solution system, such as replacement devices, replacement batteries, authentication codes, damages due to theft, fire, etc.? Is there a variety of options and methods available to implement a multi-factor authentication system across your system platform? And what type of support will your company need with the new system? Will the system require coordination with product agents or clients or continual training and use? There are several alternative Active Directory authentication methods available. There's biometrics, which is data that does not change over a person's lifetime. This is the use of something that a person is as part of the login authentication procedure for when users access a workstation or server. Some examples of biometric solutions include facial recognition, hand geometry, fingerprint ID, iris scan and retinal scan, signature, and voice and speech. You also have smart cards. These are used with certificate authority and manufacturer CSPs in Microsoft Server, and they are used as an authentication medium in place of or in combination with passwords. Typically, smart cards use the RSA key and need a smart card reader to access the information on the card. RSA is a public key encryption algorithm used in authentication systems. And you also have portable USB devices. These are readerless smart card devices or USB dongles that store the authentication info on the device themselves. Let's look at the pros and cons of alternative Active Directory authentication systems. First, with biometrics. Facial recognition. Pros, they can be matched quickly. Facial features do not change over a lifetime. However, you do only have a 90% success rate of match, which means you have a 10% failure rate. They can also be tricked by images, and these favor men over women. Hand geometry. They're simple and easy to use, unobtrusive to the user, and fairly inexpensive. However, they are not unique to each individual, and jewelry can pose challenges to the software. With fingerprint ID, it's also cheap to install, you can't guess a fingerprint, and a user can't forget or lose their finger. However, it can be duplicated easily, and if someone gets your fingerprint file, it's permanent. It's never changing. With iris and retina scan, these are highly accurate and do have a high permanent rate. They're totally unique for each user, and they're individually unique. However, they're very intrusive to the end user, and they're very expensive to set up and maintain. With voice and speech recognition, these are easy for the user to use, and the hardware is cheap to set up. However, background noise can be a problem for the software, and since they're easily recordable, they can be faked with ease. With smart cards, these are convenient to the user to use, they're self-contained security devices, they're inexpensive, and they're portable. However, they're easily lost and stolen, they have limited encryption options based on the chip size, and you need special equipment to read the smart cards. With USB devices, they're portable, more secure than traditional username and password combinations, and they can hold encryption keys and certificate device on the device itself. They're also inexpensive and portable. However, the user must always carry and possess the USB device with them. They're also easily lost or stolen, and you're going to need multiple keys or certificates for multiple tasks or functions associated with the USB dongle. However, one thing to keep in mind, because of the ease of how it can be deployed as a technology and the non-obtrusive manner in which the data can be collected and compared, facial recognition is currently being employed by police, military, and homeland security to locate criminals and threats both locally and internationally through work with the UN and NATO. Alternative Active Directory authentication system most widely used today. With data being too valuable to not keep secure and tough passwords typically too much trouble for end users to remember and maintain, companies base the pros and cons of the optional available alternative authentication methods and they come up with a system that works for them. Today, most companies use a two-factor authentication system that uses a combination of a password plus a 4-digit PIN number and a USB device that contains a random code which they get new every minute for log-on purposes. The user password is generated based on the recommended Microsoft password policy criteria, and the PIN number is a random number that is unique and memorized by the user, usually 4 to 6 digits in length. The USB device is to be carried by the user and inserted into the workstation as part of the authentication process when the user signs on. Plus, in this manner, the company is also protected if the USB is ever lost or stolen. The device cannot be used to access the system since the personal PIN is required with the device to be granted access to the system or resource. My personal recommendation, considering using an alternative authentication method with Active Directory, based on what I've researched and found out, the best method is going to be a system that is based on what you need from the alternate system and how to achieve your security goals with it. However, it's best to implement a system that is easy to integrate with your current system and software, is easy for users to use and implement into their daily routine, it's cost effective to install, maintain, and train personnel to use, it works across a wide multitude of operating systems and software, it works with mobile devices and mobile applications, it allows two-factor authentication and multiple configuration options, uses a minimum amount of system resources once installed, and is secure in itself and the data that it collects. Based on the data available that I've researched and seen, I would recommend Gold Key Security and implement a two-factor authentication system with a USB, a random PIN, and a unique password. This type of system offers the most options for the largest amount of people and costs the least amount of money. There are a few companies that actually offer alternative solutions that are better than others, and they provide smart cards and USB devices. Gold Key Technology, Cypress Security, CryptoCard Securities, and CyberSafe featuring Trust Broker. I'd like to extend some credit to references that were used in this research project. Here's the rest of the references that were used. Thank you for viewing. Have a great day.